Chairman Lamb, President Kelly, Provost Royo, Dean Toyota, Professor Potocek, honored guests, and most important, the graduating class of 2017 and your family and friends. I'm delighted to be with you here today. It's a terrific day. And I'm glad to be here for three reasons. First of all, I'm deeply grateful to Suffolk University for honoring me in this way. Second, this institution represents precisely the sort of civic keystone that my life's work has been devoted to showing is important in the lives of our communities. So this institution is a special institution. And thirdly, most important, I'm delighted to join in today's celebration of the accomplishments of the graduates of 2017, my soon-to-be fellow alumni of Suffolk University, and it is to you that I now wish to speak. You are, I am sure, feeling a variety of emotions at this moment, joy and pride at what you've accomplished, months and years of hard work and perseverance, what my mom used to call stick-to-itiveness, and moments of doubt and moments of insight culminate in this ceremony today. So enjoy that joy. You must also be feeling a deep sense of gratitude to your family and your friends and your teachers and your support network for helping you reach this day. Express that joy. Let's all express that gratitude to them for what they've done to enable you to get here. And finally, you no doubt feel anticipation for what the next stage of your life will bring. Your next professional achievements, the deepening pleasures of family and friends, and your role of leadership in Boston and in the global community. Because the degree you receive today doesn't just reward you for past hard work, it signifies that you will play a leadership role. As a friend of mine is fond of saying, our lives speak louder than our words. And in the moments that remain to me, I want to reflect on those broader responsibilities that await you, drawing a little bit on my own life experiences and on my research, framed in terms of a balance between a we society and an I society. So let me begin with a personal story. It's perhaps a story that's appropriate in this centenary of John F. Kennedy's birth. More than a half century ago, I took my first course in political science. Sitting in front of me was a smart, cute co-ed, as we said in those days, and she and I started hanging out together. We're still hanging out together. Almost 60 years later, she's sitting back there someplace. Yeah, let's give her a round of applause, too. So far, so good. And it was on a snowy day in January 1961 that Rosemary and I took a train from Philadelphia's 30th Street Station down to Washington, D.C., and stood at the back of the crowd and heard with our own ears President Kennedy admonish us to ask not what the country could do for us, but what we could do for the country. I was an adolescent then, but even now, and it was a long time ago, but even now as I say those words, actually the hair on the back of my neck is standing up because that had those words had a hugely powerful impact on me and on my life. America in the 1960s was a society that put special emphasis on we and on our obligations to one another. And my generation heard JFK speaking directly to us. I thought he was talking to me when he said, ask what you can do for your country. And that moment powerfully influenced my life. And now it's a half century later. And it's fair to ask, how has my generation done? In some respects, this half century has seen pretty amazing progress. Greater racial and gender equality, not perfect. Of course, everyone in this room knows we've got a long way to go, but better than it was then. More tolerance for diversity, niftier telephones. So we've made a lot of progress. But in one fundamental way, we have failed Kennedy's challenge, because in my lifetime, America has become much less a we society and much more an I society. And in fact, much of my own scholarship, it turns out, much of my professional life has been devoted, it turns out, to simply chronicling this sea change from a we society to an I society. In terms of economics, America has become much less equal and much more polarized between rich and poor. In social terms, America has become much more segregated. We have become more segregated in terms between rich and poor. Rich folks and poor folks live now in different neighborhoods. They go to different schools. They marry only in that community. And that division, we just don't, the two sides of town just don't know each other in the same way that we did, Americans did 50 or 60 years ago. Americans have become much less connected to one another. We have become much less neighborly, much less civically engaged. We vote less than we did then, and we're bowling alone. We're less charitable. Although we are much wealthier than in that period, we give less of our increased wealth to others, and we keep more of it for ourselves. We're a less generous nation, both materially and even emotionally. And if you haven't noticed, we're way more polarized politically into factions that don't solve problems through compromise, but merely shout insults at one another. We're a grumpier, more cynical, more self-centered, and yes, a more selfish country. In short, we've become more an I society, and we've stopped being a we society, an I society that ignores our obligations to others today, and a society that ignores our obligations, for example, in the environment, to future generations, at home and abroad. This is hard talk. You didn't cause this. This is the America that my generation has bequeathed to you. But I take heart from the advice once given to me by a very smart management consultant when I was complaining about the problems in my inbox. Never speak of problems, he said. Speak only of improvement opportunities. So here's some improvement opportunities. I'm actually optimistic that your generation can turn these trends around, because Americans just like you and just in this place have done so before. So let me give you just a quick history lesson to conclude. A little more than a century ago, at the turn from the 19th to the 20th century, 1890, 1900, 1910, America faced challenges remarkably similar to those we as a country face today. High inequality, the gap between rich and poor, it was the so-called Gilded Age, and the gap between rich and poor was as high as it ever would be in American history until now. High rates of immigration, the highest rates of immigration America had ever seen until now, and that was then triggering social upheaval and anti-immigrant violence, just as is happening now. High rates then of political corruption. A political scientist described it as a saturnalia of political corruption. A widespread sense of discontent with the major political parties. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about then. A widespread sense that those major political parties were not helping us solve our problems. Does that sound familiar? And then in little more than a decade, between 1890 and 1910, beginning in cities and small towns across America, from Toledo to Galveston to, yes, Boston, ordinary men and women began inventing for the first time in human history, new social institutions to correct those problems that they had inherited from the previous generation. They invented playgrounds. That is, I mean, we think, God must have invented playgrounds, but if he or she did, he did it through the actions of social reformers in America at that time. High schools. Did you know the high school, the idea that every kid in town should get a free 4 years of secondary education, that had never been done in the world before. And yet, beginning in small towns and communities across America, groups of American citizens were brought by social reformers to think all kids in town, just because they're kids here, ought to get 4 free years of high school education. And that was revolutionary. And it was a terrific idea. It was the best idea, one of the best reform ideas Americans have ever had. And the Scouts, I'm talking about inventions of that period. The NAACP was invented. The Knights of Columbus, the Sierra Club, lodges and labor unions, settlement houses and kindergartens. And this very institution, Suffolk University, was founded, do you know when it was founded? It's important that you know. In 1906, as part of that civic reform movement in America to try to bring more education and more reforms to this city. That's the inheritance you have by being graduates of this institution. These things, these inventions have become so commonplace today, the playground and so on, that we hardly can imagine that anyone needed to invent them, yet that during that era, that progressive era as it was called, it was young people like you who were the turnaround experts and who placed our country on a new upward trajectory. You are the heirs of those Americans, including young immigrants, and your generation faces exactly the same challenges that they did a century ago. That generation did not believe that the future would take care of itself, and neither should you. So your generation has, as my management consultant friend told me, you have a terrific improvement opportunity. If our country today faces polarization, political polarization, and economic inequality, and social fragmentation, you, collaborating with one another, you can reverse those trends. Your generation can lead the way to a more diverse, more tolerant, more cohesive, more equal society. A society in which, rather than shout at one another, we listen to one another, actually listen to one another. Your generation has the challenge and the opportunity to hear again Kennedy's challenge. Ask not what others can do for you, ask what you can do for others. Raise your voices, to be sure, but talk is not enough. Remember, as I said at the outset, your lives will speak louder than your voices. What will your life choices say? I'm more than hopeful. I'm actually optimistic as I look at all of you. So enjoy the joy that you feel today. You earned it. Express the gratitude to your family and friends that you feel today. And as you leave this place, give a thought to what your lives will say. Thank you very much.